Aloha Airlines survived a mid-air disaster, survived bankruptcy, survived decades of competition, and spent more than 60 years connecting Hawaii's islands. In the end, none of those challenges brought the airline down. For most of its existence, Aloha Airlines looked like a company that could survive almost anything. The carrier weathered recessions, fuel crises, takeover attempts, and one of the most famous aviation accidents ever recorded. Every time the airline found itself in trouble, it managed to keep flying. What nobody expected was that the challenge that finally ended Aloha Airlines wouldn't come from the sky. It would come from another airline. This is the story of Aloha Airlines, the carrier that survived almost everything, until one challenge finally proved too much to overcome. For decades, Aloha Airlines occupied a special place in Hawaii. The company's story began in 1946 when businessman Rudy Fong founded a small carrier called Trans-Pacific Airlines. Hawaiian Airlines already dominated inter-island flying at the time, which meant breaking into the market wouldn't be easy. But Fong believed there was room for another competitor. Using surplus aircraft left behind after World War II, the new airline started carrying passengers between the islands. Early operations were modest, yet the company quickly built a reputation that helped it stand out from larger competitors. Customer service became a major focus. Passengers weren't simply boarding an airplane and flying to another island. Flights often featured Hawaiian music, hula performances, and a distinctly local atmosphere that reflected the culture visitors had come to experience and residents already knew well. The approach worked. Locals embraced the airline, tourists enjoyed the experience, and before long, many people had started calling it the Aloha Airline. The nickname became so popular that the company eventually adopted it as its official name. Growth followed. Throughout the 1950s and 1960s, Hawaii's tourism industry expanded rapidly, and Aloha Airlines expanded alongside it. More aircraft entered the fleet, passenger numbers continued climbing, and the company steadily strengthened its position in the islands. A major milestone arrived when Aloha introduced jet service, becoming the first airline to operate jet aircraft on Hawaii's inter-island routes. Faster flights and newer aircraft helped attract even more passengers, while competition with Hawaiian Airlines pushed both carriers to expand. By the 1970s, Aloha Airlines had become much more than a transportation company. Residents flew the airline to visit family, travel for work, attend important events, and return home. Tourists used it to explore the islands. For many people, flying Aloha became a routine part of life. The company wasn't always operating in calm skies. Competition remained intense, merger discussions occasionally surfaced, and financial pressures appeared from time to time. Even so, Aloha kept moving forward. For decades, it seemed to find a way through every challenge. That reputation would be tested in dramatic fashion on April 28, 1988. Aloha Airlines Flight 243 departed Hilo for Honolulu on what should have been a routine 35-minute flight. The Boeing 737 climbed normally and reached approximately 24,000 feet above the Pacific Ocean. Then, everything changed. Without warning, a large section of the aircraft's upper fuselage tore away. Passengers suddenly found themselves looking directly at open sky. The force of the decompression ripped through the cabin. Loose objects flew around the aircraft, and wind blasted through the passenger compartment. Damage stretched across a large section of the airplane, creating a scene that looked almost impossible to survive. Yet, somehow, the aircraft remained in the air. Captain Robert Schornsteimer and First Officer Madeline Tompkins immediately began an emergency descent toward Maui. Nobody knew whether the damaged airplane would stay together long enough to reach an airport, and the crew faced one of the most difficult situations imaginable. Against extraordinary odds, they made it. The aircraft landed safely. 65 people reported injuries, 8 of them serious. Tragically, flight attendant Clarabelle Lansing, who had worked for the airline for 37 years, was swept from the aircraft during the decompression and was never found. News of the accident spread around the world. Images of the damaged Boeing 737 appeared on television screens and newspaper front pages everywhere. For millions of people, this was their first introduction to Aloha Airlines. Investigators later determined that metal fatigue played a major role in the accident. Years of operating short, high-frequency flights in Hawaii's saltwater environment had created conditions that accelerated structural wear on the aircraft. The accident became one of the most famous events in aviation history. Many airlines would have struggled to recover from a disaster like that. Aloha did recover, which only reinforced the company's reputation for resilience. Passengers kept flying, the airline kept growing, and during the years that followed, Aloha continued strengthening its position in Hawaii. The 1990s brought renewed optimism. At one point, Aloha even surpassed Hawaiian Airlines in inter-island market share. New Boeing 737 aircraft entered the fleet, the airline refreshed its image, and expansion plans stretched beyond Hawaii itself. Routes connected the islands with Oakland, Las Vegas, Sacramento, San Diego, Burbank, and Vancouver. What had started as a small local carrier now linked Hawaii with destinations across North America. Around 120 daily flights operated during this period. From the outside, the future appeared bright. Unfortunately, the airline industry has a habit of changing quickly. September 11, 2001 delivered a shockwave that spread across aviation. Passenger demand dropped, tourism slowed, and airlines throughout the United States suddenly found themselves facing a much harsher business environment. Hawaii felt those effects too. Visitor numbers weakened, revenue came under pressure, and operating costs continued climbing. Rising fuel prices added another burden, while broader economic uncertainty created even more challenges. Management searched for ways to keep the airline moving forward. Government assistance provided temporary relief. Employees agreed to pay cuts that helped save nearly $40 million by 2005, and executives worked to reduce expenses wherever possible. The problem was that each solution seemed temporary. Fuel costs kept rising. Financial pressure kept building. None of that mattered because the airline still needed cash to survive. By December of 2004, Aloha Airlines had reached a breaking point and filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. For many companies, that would have been the end. Aloha survived again. The airline restructured operations, renegotiated aircraft leases, secured new financing, and emerged from bankruptcy with hopes of a stronger future. It wasn't easy, but the company remained in business. Then a new competitor arrived. In 2006, Mesa Air Group launched an inter-island carrier called Go. Unlike the airlines that had spent decades building their presence in Hawaii, Go entered the market with a strategy built around extremely low fares. Passengers suddenly found tickets available for prices that seemed almost impossible to match. One-way fares sometimes dropped as low as $39. Travelers loved it. Competing airlines did not. Hawaii's market had always been relatively small. There were only so many passengers traveling between the islands, and now 3 carriers were fighting for the same customers. The result was a brutal fare war. Aloha lowered prices to compete. Hawaiian lowered prices to compete. Go continued pushing fares downward. Millions of dollars disappeared as airlines battled for market share. What nobody expected was just how damaging the fight would become. Aloha had already spent years dealing with financial challenges, and its balance sheet wasn't nearly as strong as some competitors. Every fare reduction squeezed the airline a little further. Losses mounted, pressure increased, time started running out. Then the controversy grew even larger. During legal proceedings involving Mesa Air Group, an internal email surfaced that attracted widespread attention. According to court documents, Mesa's chief financial officer wrote that if Aloha remained in business forever, the project made no sense. The message became even more controversial from there. Rather than waiting for Aloha to fail on its own, the email stated that they should be the ones to give it the last push. For former Aloha employees and supporters, those words became impossible to forget. Whether that outcome had been intentional or not, the damage was becoming obvious. The fare war continued. Fuel prices continued rising. Potential investors became harder to find. Aloha's financial position deteriorated rapidly. March 20th, 2008 marked another devastating moment when the airline filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection for a second time. Management still hoped a buyer could be found. Interest existed, discussions took place. money never arrived. 10 days later, Aloha announced that passenger operations would end. After 61 years in business, the airline had run out of options. March 31st, 2008 became the final day of passenger service. Thousands of employees lost their jobs. Passengers who had spent decades flying the airline watched a familiar part of Hawaiian life disappear. An era had come to an end. One piece of the company survived. Aloha's cargo division attracted buyers and eventually continued operating under new ownership as Aloha Air Cargo, a business that remains active today. The passenger airline, however, was gone. Looking back, the ending feels almost unbelievable. Aloha Airlines survived one of the most famous aviation accidents ever recorded. It survived economic downturns, survived years of intense competition, survived bankruptcy, and survived challenges that would have ended many other carriers. Yet none of those events ultimately brought the airline down. What finally ended Aloha Airlines was a combination of rising costs, financial pressure, and a fare war that erupted at exactly the wrong time. For more than 6 decades, the airline connected Hawaii's islands and carried millions of passengers across the Pacific. Residents used it to visit family, travel for work, attend important events, and return home. Today, most visitors to Hawaii have never heard of Aloha Airlines. Many locals still remember it. After all, this wasn't just another airline. It was part of everyday life in Hawaii. And after surviving almost everything the aviation industry could throw at it, Aloha Airlines finally encountered the one challenge it couldn't overcome.